From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello, welcome to another special edition of the McLaughlin Group from our various secluded habitats as we seek to get through the coronavirus along with you. We hope that you and your families are all well, and if they are not, you are in our thoughts. We appreciate you joining us today. Our familiar faces, Eleanor Cliff, Pat Buchanan, and Clarence Page are here, as is Ryan Godusky, a conservative commentator and longtime friend of the show. On that basis, we shall get to our first issue, which is freedom from coronavirus.
There's tremendous interest and excitement surrounding the administration's efforts to get the economy roaring once again, and I think it's going to roar once it gets open.
Halting funding to the World Health Organization, President Trump insisted this week that he will soon reopen the U.S. economy. And it's up to him how and when that happens, Mr. Trump says, not the 50 governors. But the governors disagree. Regardless, will Americans go about their daily lives if coronavirus might resurge? It's not clear. And note this, around the nation, tensions are growing as protesters, parishioners and others question the constitutionality of governor orders restricting their activities.
Pat, do you think we've reached a point now where we're really seeing a chasm between elements of the population and the political class in terms of what is tolerable and what timelines people can really accept in terms of this lockdown?
I think, Tom, there's a broad consensus now that a lifting of the shutdown is going to come sometime between May 1st and May 15th. It's going to be gradual. It's going to be in certain areas and not in others. By and large, I think the governors are going to make the call. Maybe New York will make one call and Wyoming will make another. So I think that is what's coming, and I think it's somewhat inevitable because there's tremendous pressures below from people concerned who want to get out and get back to work, et cetera. But I did notice this week, Tom, that on Tuesday and Wednesday, 2,300 people died. If that's become the new normal, each of those days, you're going to get to early May or before then, and you're going to have your 60,000 dead, and we're going to be moving to the end of May toward something like 90,000 or 100,000. So I think that everybody's moving tentatively, some swifter than others, but I think that's the way it's going to be. The 50 states are all going to behave somewhat differently.
Eleanor.
I agree that everybody's moving tentatively. You have the governors on the two coasts forming pacts, and that they will have a slower opening where they will all march together. And you have business leaders pushing back. The president has, called a task force of major business figures, I think with the expectation that they would all be urging him to go ahead. And what he heard was that you cannot open the society without ramped up testing and without expanded contact chasing to find out who else has been infected by somebody who has the virus. So I think the president is getting a lot of pushback, and in all of the recaps that the newspapers have written about his handling of this crisis from day one, one quote really jumped out at me, and it was Kellyanne Conway. When the president was pushing to open on Easter Sunday, she said, if you do that, it's premature, and you will be accountable for every death after that. At every point along the way, somebody's going to be held accountable. The president is trying to spread the blame, governors, the World Health Organization, China, but ultimately he's the person in charge. And he has said this is going to be the most difficult decision he will make, and he hopes it's the right one. I hope he gives it really careful consideration and listens to the public health officials.
Ryan, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think that not only state by state is going to be different, I think that regions will be different. The governor of Iowa has delegated different regions of her own state to being more constrained and then less constrained. Other states like my own in New York, it's basically a one-size-fits-all, even though 96% of all cases in New York, which is the hardest hit state, have occurred in the bottom 14 counties, and the northern counties and the western counties have very few cases. The governor of Michigan, for example, there's 25 counties that have less than 5 cases, and some have 0 cases. In areas that have been heavily hit, like Detroit, like New Orleans, like Chicago, like New York, we need to be very cautious of how we proceed forward. In other areas, though, I do think people want to get back to normal as much as possible. Maybe that doesn't mean opening up restaurants necessarily per se, but maybe office buildings, maybe having to wear masks or glove inside places. People want to get back to normal as much as possible. And also a lot of people, especially on the lower economic levels, cannot work from home. They have been extremely negatively affected by this situation, and they are going to need either more economic relief from Washington or their businesses to start opening up very, very soon.
Clarence.
Oh, we saw some dissension this week. And speaking of Michigan, a big demonstration by protesters who want the state business reopened right now. And a lot of them were carrying "Make America Great Again" caps and signs. But I think the American people on the whole deserve a round of applause, among other more substantial rewards, for really supporting this massive effort, understanding that the common good calls for these sort of sacrifices to be made as if we were in a time of war. At the same time, the public shouldn't be overtaxed with their sacrifices right now. And the president is his back and forth over who has more authority, himself or the governors. He finally recognized the Constitution, makes that very clear, that the states are where power originates. And we're seeing now, Ryan made reference to the New York, New Jersey area. You've got a regional approach there of states getting together to work on opening back up. And Governor Pritzker of Illinois and other Midwestern states are pulling together near the end of the week to get some kind of a plan for a gradual reopening. So we are still seeing massive support and a lot of work by a lot of people to make this thing work.
The president does not have unilateral power to lift the restrictions. He didn't impose them. They're state-imposed restrictions. And the president has been threatening all kinds of things. He's going to adjourn Congress if they don't confirm all his appointments. He can't do that either. And Mitch McConnell, the Senate leader, said they're not going to dismiss Congress in the middle of a pandemic. And there's a constitutional challenge also coming over the World Health Organization and its funding. The World Health Organization has its flaws. I will admit that. Everybody admits that. But they are coordinating research for a vaccine around the world. It's not just American researchers who are in the race for a vaccine. They are doing important work. And the president can't, this is money that's been appropriated, earmarked by Congress. So he's really looking for a constitutional challenge, because he'd rather talk about that than the numbers of dead.
Wait a minute.
I pointed out the figures. The figures are alarming.
The same people that said Donald Trump does not have the power to open up the states 2 weeks ago were beating him about the head and shoulders for not closing down this in other conservative states which were holding out. Now, with regard to spending on the WHO, look, even folks in Australia and around the world know the organization is a toady of the communist Chinese. And as for cutting off the money, look, if Donald Trump shut off those funds, it would be a long time before Ruth Bader Ginsburg opened.
Right, and I think that under Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution, the president has broad powers over Congress in time of emergency. And the World Health Organization, as Pat said, it is a toady of the Chinese Communist government. They defended the Chinese Communist government over and over during this pandemic. I want to get back to the states, though. If you like, the state of Ohio announced today, May 1st, they're opening up. Governor Mike DeWine, who was one of the most cautious governors when it came to the coronavirus, and exerted an immense amount of pressure to say they even canceled his state election and pushed it back to April 28th. I think if you have red state governors who handle this case very, very properly, pushing forward and saying, okay, time to reopen the economy, I think a lot of Democratic governors in blue states, places like Kansas, places like North Carolina, may feel immense pressure if other states in their regions are opening up.
The way the virus works, it doesn't respect boundaries. Look at what happened in the pork packaging plant in Iowa. They suddenly blossomed with this cluster. One person leaves there can infect many others. Now, this is a time to be cautious and to move very slowly, and to suggest that, oh, the red states, because they only have a handful, they don't have to worry. Again, the virus is stealthy. It's going to stalk us for some time to come, and there's no reason to cut into a lifeline that is helping the rest of the world navigate this virus, simply because Donald Trump needs a scapegoat to make up for his failings.
It's not simply Donald Trump. The American people have a voice in this.
Oh,
in
yes.
a number of areas we saw in Michigan and elsewhere, a number of areas they're starting to speak up and they say we want to move. Now, I agree exactly. There are certain areas, nursing homes and places like that. The elderly folks, I think, should stay situated where they are. There's no doubt about it. But if you got a different place, I mean, that's why we have 50 states and we have mayors and others, each of them who can make the judgment decision. I do agree that the President of the United States shouldn't be the one to decide for every state, city, county, and community unless we're in danger of a nuclear war or something and he shuts it down.
Those governors and those mayors and those officials are all begging for more testing so that we can know what we're facing. And that's where the president has failed.
Let's bring in Clarence.
Yeah, well, that is true. And it all comes back to the lack of testing, putting a big question mark over how we proceed, how we fashion a reopening when we don't really even know how many people are infected, really. It's a very small percentage that have been tested. And we don't have a real a schedule in that regard for how we can get proper treatment to everybody once we have gotten that taken care of. So it's really, we've got to move very slow right now. And it's understandable there's a lot of impatience out there.
Ryan, let me ask you a question here.
Sure.
We see now certain countries, actually Germany, for example, Austria, moving to release some of the measures that they had put into place earlier than we had in terms of lockdowns. How much do you think their experiences in the coming 2-3 weeks will guide our own? Or how much do you think, quite frankly, American governors, mayors, the president will, set a different course?
Well, one thing Germany was planning on doing was allowing for testing to see if you have the antibodies to protect yourself from the coronavirus. And if you do, then you would be allowed to go into the workforce. United States has done the most testing of any country, and we have the smallest amount per 1,000 than the rest of the entire world. I mean, we don't know what China's number actually is, but among the Western countries, we are far and away the best place to be in. I mean, Italy.
Brian, that's not true. You're circulating one of the president's lies.
We have done the most testing than any other country.
What about South Korea?
What?
About South Korea?
Yeah, South Korea's done much more than we have.
Clarence, you pick up this ball. Yes.
I was talking of Western countries between the United States and Europe.
On certain countries.
Well, Europe.
All right. Clarence, I'll give you the final word and then we'll go on to our next issue.
Final word? Oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to handle it. But no, unfortunately, there's been too much misinformation around what actual preparations were done and our status right now. If I was President Trump, I would be very cautious about wanting to move quickly, start reopening things with the little bit of information that we have right now.
Okay.
We don't know how many people are walking around with the virus and may start showing signs.
Okay, let's move on. Issue 2, Barack and Bernie back Biden.
And that's why I'm so proud to endorse Joe Biden for President of the United States. Choosing Joe to be my vice president was one of the best decisions I ever made, and he became a close friend.
Former President Barack Obama might view Joe Biden as a close friend, but he made him wait for that endorsement. Still, it wasn't the only endorsement the de facto Democratic nominee secured this week. Also offering their support was Biden's erstwhile challenger, Bernie Sanders, even if grudgingly, that is. So, a Trump versus Biden showdown in November now seems all but certain.
Eleanor, how do you see this in terms of Joe Biden now moving towards the convention if it happens and the general election? I mean, what do you think?
Well, the convention will happen. It may be a virtual one. Democratic unity, party unity. Republicans were counting on a fractured Democratic Party, and that's not going to happen. And the Obama endorsement was worth waiting for because we learned that he played a significant role behind the scenes. He had at least 4 conversations with Bernie Sanders. He brought Sanders along. Sanders did a remarkable video with Biden this week saying, we need you in the White House. And Sanders is going to bring along not all of his people, but I'm waiting for the AOC endorsement. I think that will come eventually. This is going to be a very big Democratic year. I think President Trump is very nervous about his reelection prospects, and he should be.
Pat?
My feeling is the Democratic Party is going to be united. There's no Democrat, I think, who is going to withhold his support or endorsement of Joe Biden if he or she wants any kind of future in the Democratic Party. But at the same time, Joe's going to have a united party. There is no enthusiasm for him. There is no energy. He's been sitting there in his basement for a couple of months now. And every time he comes out, everybody keeps their, they're on edge that some horrible gaffe is going to come out, or he's going to forget his train of thought. So I think, again, as we said last week, this election, the guy that's united the Democratic Party is not Joe Biden. It's Donald Trump. That's the only thing they're really united about. They want to defeat Trump, and they're willing to swallow virtually anything. They're all going to be loyal. Stand up.
That's something I agree.
He does.
That's something I agree with. I agree with you that Donald Trump unifies the party, but so does Barack Obama, and that was why he withheld his endorsement, because he didn't want to add to the divisions that are already obviously out there. And we know the Republicans have had their divisions in the past too, so it's not unique to one party. But I think Obama's done a good job of patiently bringing folks together behind the scenes. Now we see them out in front of the scenes, and they're trying now to make Joe Biden that unifying candidate. So far, beginning with his rival candidates, we have seen one by one various factions pulling together behind him. Now the progressives are holding out, but the progressives also give a disappointing turnout for Bernie, with the exception of the Hispanic voters, certainly.
Ryan, let me ask you, do you think that the Democrats have a challenge prospectively as we come into the fall of articulating a more, if not open borders, but amnesty, a more liberalized immigration policy in a context where the coronavirus and the potential of people bringing the virus in might play on people's minds, even if unfairly, even if the facts don't necessarily support that concern? Do you think that's a political issue at all, or am I just going off on a weird tangent?
No, you're not going off on a weird tangent at all. A recent Reuters poll found that 80% of Americans want a full halt on all immigration of any kind for the foreseeable future as of right now because of the coronavirus. 80% of Americans. Joe Biden not only endorses de facto open borders, not enforcing any of our immigration laws for the first 90 days of his presidency, but then giving health care to illegal aliens who come into the country and break our laws. Joe Biden also suffers from the fact that he has not only no enthusiasm as of this point, but his poll numbers and his every single solitary poll that came out in the last 2 weeks, with the exception of the CNN poll, find his numbers with young people substantially lower than Hillary Clinton's was during the same exact time period. I wrote the piece for the Washington Examiner. Joe Biden has a 12-point lead with young people against Donald Trump as of right now, when you look at all polls and the mean of them. Hillary Clinton at this time had a 21-point lead. That is a substantial loss. A Morning Consult poll found that a plurality of Bernie supporters actually Bernie supporters under the age of 35 do not plan on voting for Joe Biden and view him unfavorably and will sit this election out. I don't know how Joe Biden, when these voters would not come out for Bernie Sanders in the primary, Joe Biden will energize them while he's talking about listening to people on his record player.
What a tragedy that Biden got the nomination, and that what a great speech that would be before the young Republicans. Good for you, Ryan.
That was not that's a substantial fact, though.
November is going to be a referendum on Donald Trump's handling.
That may be the case, though. That may be the case, but we have not. The attack against Joe Biden has not even begun. And the only time Joe Biden did badly in the Democratic primary was when he was exposed to Kamala Harris. And she attacked him over a nonsense thing about busing. Forget about the idea of having illegal aliens giving free health care. Go tell a Michigan worker that
by the way.
You can shout away all you want.
All right, one at a time.
Joe Biden. but he is bringing a solidity and a sense of experience and a sense of compassion and empathy.
Solidity? He doesn't know his wife.
One at a time. One at a time.
No, I don't shut him up. I think he's embarrassing himself.
He doesn't know, but Joe Biden does not know Barack Obama's name. Most of the time while speaking, he is forgetting key elements of his own life.
All right, let's bring in Clarence.
Question over his sanity.
I've been hearing so much about how incompetent Joe Biden is, blah, blah, blah. Let's wait and see. I mean, how long ago was it that people said, what happened to Joe Biden, you know? And then boom, he came from behind, he got the nomination. Virtually got the nomination now. But the fact is, there is a different playing field going on out there. I agree with you that Joe Biden hasn't been as impressive on camera as Donald Trump, who has made a career out of being on camera. But Joe Biden does know the issues, and he knows the job, and it's going to be up to him to get out there and campaign. Like I said, once again, I can't wait for the debates.
Yeah, I think Joe Biden, in his campaigns, I don't think Joe Biden really won this. He was grabbed by the seat of his pants and thrown over the goal line by the Democratic establishment in South Carolina, which was looking at a Bernie nomination when Bernie was saying nice Fidel Castro. I think when has Biden ever run a campaign in and of himself where the speeches, the agenda, the causes he represents, the idealism have rallied people? He ran 3 times for president. First 2, he was out, I think, before Iowa. The third, he lost the first 3 primaries up there. And until the establishment came to his rescue, he was going nowhere. But that's just it. He's going to be in a campaign now. He can't keep hiding in his Delaware basement.
Eleanor, let me ask you, Eleanor, what do you think Joe Biden's top line issue, beyond the articulation that I'm better to deal with coronavirus than President Trump, what do you think the issue he'll fixate on as the one that him personally?
I think healthcare, if you're going to use the word fixate, but I think the coronavirus and the fact we're in the middle of a pandemic, and a lot of people out there think Trump is actually going off the rails. It does widen the prism for what he can campaign on, and I think he will adopt much of the Sanders goals, if not the specific agenda, because people understand we need government. They are relying on government for money, for advice about how to take care of their health, and they are looking at a government that has been hollowed out and is not run correctly and professionally by this president. And I think Biden brings a sense of competence, which I think we really need. And faith in government, that government can actually work.
Republicans have not really had enthusiasm about national health care. They haven't been able to get a consensus in Congress, and they haven't been able to really, President Trump keeps promising better health care than Obamacare, and it's going to be cheaper and blah, blah, blah. They've produced nothing. And he doesn't really know how to articulate himself on that whole issue. That's why I say wait for the debates, put them on the same stage.
You got Joe Biden in the midst of the greatest, pandemic since the Spanish flu 100 years ago, says the thing to do is to open our borders, ollie in free, welcome the folks in, and give them health care. That's all you got to do to tell a crowd. The crowd will say, we don't believe he said that. And then you show the game films. And I think that's going to be about it for Joe.
Beijing Biden is going to sit there and campaign on open borders. He's going to sit there and open his association with the Sun and the Chinese government. He's going to sit there and be exposed to the fact that he's going to have to endorse very radical things like your teenage daughter is going to have to share a locker room with a boy who identifies as a girl. It's going to be very hard for middle America to endorse and embrace the radical views on social issues that Joe Biden will have to embrace to get the AOC endorsement.
And Biden's problem is that he doesn't have the versatility. He doesn't have the acumen. He doesn't have the verbal ability and agility to stand on a stage, something he might have had against Paul Ryan, but he no longer has it.
All right, 10 seconds, Clarence. 10 seconds, Clarence.
Okay, well, I think the reason why Obamacare has gained public approval more and more over time is because people are discovering the real issue isn't health care for immigrants, it is health care for Americans. And this whole coronavirus crisis has only underscored that. And Joe Biden and the Democrats are speaking to that, and so far it has been a winner.
Pat disparages as the establishment. It's black people and it's white suburban women who used to vote Republican, and they are going to be out there in droves.
Predictions, Pat.
Predictions. I believe that the 60,000 figure of dead in the coronavirus is going to be passed early in May, and we're going to keep on going. And I hope it's not based on, it's based on solid numbers, but I hope they're not playing with the numbers. But I think it's sort of grim, and we're going to cut right through it.
All right. Eleanor.
Nobody's playing with the numbers to make the death total high to make Trump look bad, if that's what you're trying to say. The data change every day and the models shift. But my prediction is that Texas will be in play in November because of the coronavirus and because of oil prices.
Okay, Ryan.
I predict that China will become a major focal point going into the summer and the fall, and a unifying issue for Republicans as they demand that China be held responsible for their handling of the coronavirus early on.
Okay, I think that's a good one. Clarence?
I predict that we will see more protests and pushback by people who want to end the quarantine, but on the whole, it's going to stay because folks understand that in the long run, it's better for all of us.
Okay, I predict that as we move through the summer, optimism will regain its spark and we will find ourselves in a better position than we anticipated now. A very broad perspective there, but one I'm sticking by. Okay, thank you very much for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the show and I hope you'll join us next time.